Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah. Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah.
I have no idea what happens to someone with ALS. I've never, well, in my
like the symptoms?
yeah, what are they like? What are the symptoms like?
Basically,
isn't it
your
muscle
mind stays
deterioration?
sharp and your body loses its muscle function.
Yeah.
Totally.
And then it eventually gets to your breathing.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
That's usually when people die.
If you don't breathe, you die. I heard a rumor about that.
I've heard that's true. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that if you went, and so, you know, the tragedy of this submersible that happened off the coast of Newfoundland, it's you know, I was wondering, you know, when they thought that maybe they were still alive and they were just existing on the 4 or 5 days of oxygen, I thought, well, I wonder what that would be like, knowing that within a certain period of time you're going to lose your oxygen and you're going to just pass away. Would that be kind of a, maybe kind of a pleasant way? I think it's called hypoxia. Is that the word, hypoxia?
Yeah, hypoxia.
I'm guessing it was much more sudden, Tim.
That's what I read. Yeah,
The
Yeah,
compression.
probably more like a guillotine.
I think it's kind of like a nanosecond that this thing just kind of imploded.
Yes.
But kind of a morbid thought I was having this morning is, given the atmospheric pressure at nearly 3 miles down, would it compress the bodies in such a way that they would be just invisible? I mean, I would think that that pressure would be enormous.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like crushing pressure.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Probably more like being run over by a steamroller,
Probably.
or maybe
Except
multiple. You know, I
I
think
mean,
the human
if
body
there was,
can withstand only a certain amount of compression before it flattens out or disintegrates.
and even if they were sentient, even at that point.
Mhm.
The Titanic, on the other hand, took, I think, 2 hours before it sunk.
Mhm.
I read yesterday a narrative from a woman who survived. She was one of those who got into a lifeboat with about 30 other people, and they got away from the ship and watched it sink. But
Mhm.
2 hours is a long time for getting people off. And what somebody sent me a message was that the crew had failed to do a lifeboat drill a day or two before, and were not as well prepared as they should have been.
Wow.
Well,
I think
James Cameron was on TV last night, and he apparently is not only the movie producer, but he's also an expert and has been down in his own submersible vehicle to the Titanic a number of times.
Wow.
And he said the sad irony here is that the captain of the Titanic ignored warnings about the ice fields ahead of him, and it appears the captain of the Titan ignored warnings about the durability of the vehicle.
Mhm.
And then he explained composites are good, he said, when the pressure's coming from the inside out, but not good when the pressure's coming from the outside in.
What a tough lesson to learn. Wow.
Well, and so they went down, you know, about another 10 times or something already. What they didn't realize is that the composite was deteriorating with every dive. And so
Just like you and me.
Catastrophic failure.
Yeah,
Fatigue.
it's like we're doing.
You know, like on airplanes, they pay very close attention to metal fatigue.
Yeah, right.
Or composite, like your bones and our skin and our
Mhm.
innards. I had heard from a friend that the father and son, who I think were from Pakistan, maybe,
Yeah,
they were quite the adventurers, and that in past times they had gone up in Virgin Galactic, you know, that
mhm,
spaceship that goes up into, you know,
mhm.
lower Earth orbit.
Mhm.
And I thought, wow, you know, that what a great, not, it's not great that they're dead, but what a wonderful father son kind of thing to be able to do.
Yes.
You know, take a ride in space and go down and look at the Titanic. I'd rather look at the Titanic with movies, I think, rather than going down into it.
Amen to that. But
I would
those-
too.
that father and son,
I'd rather go to dinner with my son.
good call. But that
Go-
father and son must have been incredibly wealthy.
Yeah, they were.
Oh, yeah.
Among the
Yeah.
wealthiest families in Pakistan. I
Oh.
think they were living in London, however.
Interesting.
I read also that the son really didn't want to go.
Yeah, I heard that too. And the mother didn't want him to go.
Yeah.
But the father
Uh-oh.
insisted.
I'm sure she's got a lot to say at this point. Yeah, poor thing.
So,
Of course, my very practical question is who the hell is paying for all this foolishness? We know that, don't we?
Well, retired priests probably could afford it, but I don't, you know, the rest of us.
No, I mean the rescue.
well,
Oh.
I mean, there's a weird lesson about the value that we put on life.
Mm-hmm.
But Tom, your
Somewhat selectively.
question
Huh?
is a good one. I mean, I know that I've read a lot about, you know, Coast Guards around the world who've had to go out into expensive search and rescue for sailors that are lost and things like that. And I know that if you took an ambulance from your home to the hospital, Medicare or somebody's going to get a bill. I wonder if you have to be rescued by the Coast Guard, if there's any billing arrangement, or is it just part of the, you know, like national defense? You know, you don't get charged for every airplane that saves your ass, you know. Does anybody know whether or not there are
I don't
fees
know.
for doing it?
No,
I don't think they do, but in the state of New Hampshire, if you get lost on the mountains and they have to rescue you, and it's because of your negligence, you get charged.
that makes sense. Yeah.
I know
That sounds like a good lawsuit, doesn't it?
at the Grand Canyon, if you go down on your own to the river and you need to be helped out, they do charge you a fee for that. Yeah, yeah. Not that I've done it, but I understand that it's kind of upfront. You know that if you need to have us bring donkeys or burros down to pull your ass out, we're going to charge you for that.
I'll bet people have to sign disclosures, all kinds of things like that. When they
Maybe, yeah, I don't know.
Norm Supanchek,
Yes,
Your-
sir, Reed.
your picture is wonderful. Whatever you've done, it's
Working?
good.
Oh, good.
For the moment,
I can't
Yeah.
see it, but that's okay. I don't know why I can't. Before I could see my picture, but now I don't. I don't know what.
We can see you fine now, and we're not having any, well, we got it back. What did you just do? Undo it.
I don't know what I just did. What can I see?
I went
How's
online
that?
to look that up. Flickering bar on Zoom, and there is a setting that if you modify it, or a couple of settings, if you modify them, you may be able to get rid of it.
Just
Oh.
still flickering? I can't see me.
I will send that out to everybody. So that then
It has stopped
everyone
now,
can thank
Norm.
you, Norm, for
Sit back and relax. Don't touch anything, Norm. You're wonderful right now as you are.
Yeah. Bob Bono, hello.
Hello.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Bob.
Hey,
I'm up in
Bob.
the trees.
Hey, Bob.
I didn't get in the thing to go down to the Titanic.
Yeah,
Why not?
Huh?
Why not?
Well, it was a little too far to get to where they started.
Oh,
Terrible
Well,
situation.
you missed a great
very
adventure.
bad.
Speaking of,
Going back to what,
Norm,
going back
you
to
were
what-
at the priest conference in San
In
Diego,
San Diego?
Yeah.
Yes,
and how did it all go?
it was very good. I'm so glad that they have that organization, the Association of United States Catholic Priests, and there are about 200 of us down there,
Hmm.
and it was awesome. It's just really awesome. Really, they're working on some good stuff together, try to influence, and it's really it's the only United States Catholic Priest organization there is right now, and the sad part is that the priests in it are mostly older. None of the young, well, I'm not gonna say none. There are some young priests there, but very few.
How much of synodality was included in that time?
Oh, very much. It was very much a
Good.
big focus. Yes.
and so Norman,
Uh-huh.
what kinds of topics or seminars did they have? What kinds of things do you talk about?
Many things. Some controversial things and some not so controversial, but we talked about, the priests that have been accused, how to work with that, and racism, and the possibility of women deacons.
Right.
And
Somebody has to be at the table that I can trust. And so for 8 o'clock, there's only one person, Aaliyah Romero y Vigil. Do you know that person?
Bob
Bob,
mute himself.
Mute yourself,
Um,
Bob.
Then, I can tell her
I can mute him.
what she,
Okay,
That's it, yeah.
There.
You all know, of course, that the organizing inspiration for that organization was Bob.
We didn't know that. I
Yes.
didn't know that.
I didn't know
Yeah.
that. I knew that.
Yeah,
yeah, Bob was one of the key organizers at the
right.
beginning.
He actually he's kind of the principal of the whole thing.
Yeah.
What up,
New guys
Vida?
in.
Vida?
Gary.
Oh,
all
Ned.
right.
Gary.
Welcome.
Hello, Gary.
I'm late.
Ned, Gary.
Hey, Gary,
Norm
Gary,
went
look-
down to San Diego to the priest conference.
You did.
Sorry? What?
hey, Norm,
We were talking
So
about the AUSCP conference down in San Diego.
Okay, I am,
So-
Gary wasn't there.
No, I didn't go. Norm went.
I went, and Will Connor went, and what's his name must have been Palos Verdes.
My machine's having a hard time here.
Welcome
Norm,
to the club,
Norm,
Norm.
did your badge say Norm Supanchick, LA for Telly?
The Norm Zubacek, I didn't say Ellie Fratelli.
okay, I am sending right now, sending all of you the web page for the conference, so nobody can plead ignorance now.
Sounds good.
Oh, very good.
Well, it was already done, right? I mean,
It's already done,
Well
yeah.
done.
how was it, Norm?
I think
It was
the,
very good. I mean, we're doing some very good stuff, and it's sad that most of the priests are older priests. There's
Yeah.
very few young priests involved in it.
Yeah, yeah.
Now,
But
if
a
we
lot
were
of
talking about
conservative-
promoting the Latin Mass, you get a lot of young priests.
Yeah.
and I go back to that. When you're talking about the Latin Mass, what is the sentiment of you old guys in terms of the celebration of the Latin Mass? What kind of perspectives do you guys have?
Well, it's
we've been through
useful
this.
if you have people of a lot of different languages together to celebrate Mass, but if you're with people who speak English, it's better to have a Mass in English because otherwise people don't understand it anymore. Who understands Latin today? You know?
I think for me, Tim, that, and we talked about this, I think Frank brought it up a while back about the first Eucharistic prayer. I went to Mass, the ordination of this deacon. In fact, he's coming over tonight for dinner at our cathedral 2 weeks ago, and it was in English, but it was as Latin as it could be. And it's, to me, it's more, I react to it because I see it as a statement against the Second Vatican Council, not because it's, I don't see it as a prayer. You know, I don't see it as Mass.
Interesting point. Yeah.
It's the Latin Mass to me, and I've only been, actually, I went to, I had a funeral a number of years ago at St. Vincent's. A lady had died. She was very, you know, she was a very, she loved the old stuff, you know, and would used to say the rosary all the time and kneel down, and when she was younger, she was more militant as she said, than they are now. But anyway, she had a Latin Mass, and they got some priest from San Francisco who'd been coming up here saying the masses in Latin, and he brought his own coterie of people. And St. Vincent's has a big back altar, you know, with a high altar and all that sort of stuff. And so he said his Mass with the back to the people, and they used tons of incense. And I remember one guy was saying, well, you know, this is the, you know, he says, he didn't want to be offensive, but he says, of course, we use a lot more elegant things than you do in the English Mass. But anyway, I sat there and listened to it, and it was as bad as ever. You know, the guy, they can say Mass in Latin, and it always comes out the same way. You know, it was what I always remember. But I think those people, at least not everybody, but it's kind of a statement. Now, there are people, a lot of Hispanics, for example, if they had a Latin Mass, they would love it only because it's devotional. They wouldn't see it as something contrary to the Second Vatican Council. But I think these young guys, I think for them it is. And they say they love it, and it's very inspiring to them, but it's not inspiring to me.
So it's so funny because they're going back not to the original Mass. Mass is said in the language of the people from the very beginning, you know. And then in the Middle Ages, they caught on, you know, every Mass should be in Latin or whatever. And then they're going back to Middle Ages, not really going back to the origin of the Mass.
Well, they're going back to the Council of Trent.
Yes, exactly.
And you know, a couple of things to remember about the Council of Trent was not all the bishops were able to make it. And they had a lot of, you know, ups and downs. Was it John O'Malley, I think it is, who wrote about it, you know? There were a lot of it's amazing that the Council of Trent actually accomplished anything.
Yeah.
But it did.
How many years did they have sessions?
Yeah,
I
8
forget.
or 9.
It's something like that. You know,
And they
one of the things
Trent-
about the decree for the Roman Missal was that they recognized the fact that throughout the Western Church, there were dozens of local rites. And a part of it was that many of those rites needed reform, just like the Roman rite did. And because, you know, the liturgical rigidity that we experienced after the Council of Trent was in part because of the invention of printing.
Why? What do you mean by that?
Well,
Why?
I'm going to explain, Tim.
Well, okay. I'm sorry.
Give us a
Yeah.
chance.
In part because, well, Protestantism is, you know, largely due, it got spread because of the invention of printing too. You could get information out there cheaply by printing up tracts and all of that. But what the Council of Trent, or the, not the Trent itself, but the Pope, who was Paul V, I think, or Pius V, one or the other. When he promulgated the Roman Missal, he said, this is to be used in the Roman rite. those locations that have another rite that you can trace back 200 years or more must reform your own rite. But if you don't, you must use the Roman rite. Now,
Yeah.
in those days, reforming a rite was expensive because you had to get all these scholars together and they had to come up with the revisions and all, and then you had to print them and distribute the missals. Well, it was a lot cheaper to, send a messenger to Rome and say, we'd like to order 25 of your liturgical books already printed and bound, rather than doing it ourselves. And that's one of the reasons why many of the local rites simply got on the Roman bandwagon. There were some that didn't. Toledo, the Mozarabic rite. Some dioceses in England, the Sarum rite. There were a couple of Gallican rites. Milan has had the Ambrosian rite. They only celebrate it a couple times a year now. But, there was liturgical fluidity back then, and Rome even recognized liturgical fluidity, but afterwards became heavy-handed in the imposition of the Roman rite to those that did not reform their own rite. Does that make any sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Silly. Okay, Tom, a
there's
question. When you say reform your right, what was the implication of needing to reform something? What was going on?
because it got overlaid, just like the Vatican II said, it got overlaid with lots of other extraneous ceremonies. Now, I think all of them were in Latin, but Latin tended not to be that much of a problem because the only people worrying about it were educated people, and they all knew Latin. So it wasn't something that got down to the popular mentality like the Protestant reforms did. But had there become a spirit of reform without, part of the problem was, I think, with the Protestant Reformation, we were under siege. We were under a confrontational situation. We were in conflict. You don't make your best judgments when you're in the heat of battle. In the heat of battle, you basically have to, number one, survive, and number two, win. So, but what's sad is after the Council of Trent, that rigidity got imposed. But
Okay.
I don't think it was really totally the fault of the Council of Trent. It was in part the fault of the implementation of it.
Tom, was the rigidity there before and simply continued as the way things get done?
Not so much. We don't even really recognize that Franciscan theology based on Bonaventure and Thomistic theology have some very, very significant differences, especially in their spirituality. And the Franciscan, spirituality is much more what we would, I think, call contemporary than elements of the Thomistic theology. So, there was a lot of diversity taking place on a whole variety of levels. That a lot of which probably did not get recorded. It's the winners who record things. And you can you can either destroy the opposition, what the opposition writes, or you can just sort of let it die because we won and we've got the money to promulgate our books and, you know, et cetera, et cetera.
So are we, I'm sorry, go ahead.
On the Latin Mass question, there's a point I would really like to make that is generally totally neglected, particularly by those who push the spirit of Vatican II. And that is the fundamental, and this is something brought back by Vatican II. You know, the fundamental structure of the Mass is there are two parts: liturgy of the Word and liturgy of the Eucharist. And fundamentally, the liturgy of the Word has to concentrate on the active understanding and participation and response of the people as the people are able to do it. The liturgy of the Eucharist is essentially drawing all of the people together to be, in a sense, God-centered, God-focused. And, you know, when you say the Mass in Latin, what we really should be talking about, or the Mass facing the East, even the symbolic East, what we should be talking about is a distinction between the liturgy of the Word and the liturgy of the Eucharist. You don't do the liturgy of the Word with your back to the people. You should not. That, you know, that is a violation of every single possible liturgical principle, to celebrate the liturgy of the Word with your back to the people. In the Eastern rites, I feel myself getting into a lecture and I may be losing some people. I don't know. But in the Eastern
You're okay. You're okay.
in the Eastern rites, the liturgy of the Word was always celebrated in the middle of the assembly. And then the focus went to the altar and the Holy of Holies and eventually the icon screen and, you know, all of that. But
Would you say, Tom, that that approach drew the people more into the liturgy of the Eucharist? In other words, join us together as community?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the Word draws them together.
As
But
community.
the presider leads them together to the Eucharist.
Okay.
Also is a possible understanding of the benefit of the priest and the people facing the same way as a pilgrim people. And I think, you know, Benedict tried to make that point. He obviously did not reject Mass facing the people, but he also said, you know, hey, consider the option, consider the value of facing in the same direction, east, the rising sun, symbol of Christ, as we celebrate the Lord's presence. That there is, and there's a real traditional value to that. That the earliest churches all faced east, and you go and, you know, visit some of those places, like all through Turkey and Greece and parts of Italy and all that have the ruins of the ancient churches, and they all face east. So
You
anyway,
know, I always thought it was a difference between God as transcendent and God as immanent. I mean, the idea in the with the priest, you know, God is up here, way beyond us. The priest is in the middle, and the people are back here, and the priest is kind of the intermediary, or whatever you want to put it. And we're looking at God up here, so we're worshiping the Lord up here, way, you know, beyond us, the beyond aspect of God. And the Second Vatican Council returned to a more imminent sense of God, that the God is present in the community, he's present in the presider, he's present in the word, present in the sacrament. And so the idea that we're all gathered together, because the priest then becomes the presider, and not, we used to say the priest was a celebrant, but the community celebrates the Eucharist.
Yeah.
So I always thought it was kind of a turn towards a more imminent sense of God as present within the community. That's
The
how
question that I would have there is, are those two things mutually exclusive? Do we have to
No.
have one or the other? Or are they
No.
two dimensions of the mystery of real presence?
Yes, that's right.
So
I'm just saying, I think Vatican II introduced a more imminent sense of God as present
it
within
doesn't
us.
necessarily exclude the transcendence.
No,
Okay,
no.
that's all. So let's keep how we relate to both of them in mind.
It's just that I don't know how but I just know that I just see all this business to me to be a statement rather than a prayer.
Well, there are circumstances. For example, I celebrated Mass here on the feast of Saint Marcellinus and Saint Peter.
Oh, yeah, you use the Eucharist.
I used Eucharistic prayer number 1
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it wasn't a statement
No,
so much as it was the appropriate thing to do because they're mentioned in it.
Yeah.
So I agree, Gary. We have to get along beyond this statement thing. The other point, Tom, I think that you make in the two parts of the liturgy is that we need to get beyond readers. We're not reading, we're proclaiming.
Mhm.
And it's not kind of an intellectual exercise alone that's telling you what Jesus and St. Paul are doing. It's a communication of the heart and soul of the Savior
Yeah.
through Jesus and St. Paul. So much more happens than that you just listen intently.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think there's something of a neglected, and so therefore, in keeping with your point that you can't communicate with people, you're back to them. Well, you can't communicate with people either in a language they don't understand. Now, you can go to a Catholic church and not necessarily have to understand everything that's being said at you and have a sense of that you're part of, the universality of the church. But you're not going to get the fullness, if you will, of the grace of the Eucharist if you can't understand the great message the person, not the message, the person that's being presented in the Word of God.
Yeah, as Tom always says, the encounter. One thing that
Right.
always bugs me about the traditionalists is that, at least in my perception, is that they tend to want to emphasize the transcendent almost to the exclusion of the immanent. So that, the coming up for communion, this morning at Mass, several people knelt down and bowed way down, and the priest had to almost kneel down to give them communion. And that's just a little tiny example to me, of this orientation toward the transcendence of God and the emphasis on God, and not really have any feeling for the humanity, the community, what the Eucharist does when we consume the Eucharist. And we're now the body of Jesus together as one body, although many, as that hymn says. And it's it's a bad thing for me not to do what I don't know, was it you, Frank, you were saying it's not just a proclamation. It's in fact, it's not a proclamation. At some point, it's a participation in the body and the communion.
And
know-
an invitation, Ned, an invitation, come.
Okay, but the point is that we're not sitting there looking to the east, raising our eyes, trying to imagine some king, some triumphant high king, you know.
And it seems to be linked with what at least in the experiences that I've had lately, with a kind of a Jansenistic spirituality. The
Yeah.
idea that we are nothing, we are sinners, we are not. I mean, the emphasis is on being we're not worthy of anything, and like at St. Eugene's, I mean, the other day when they gave communion, everybody knelt down. There was nobody received communion standing up. They had the altar out there, and they all knelt down. And when our bishop preaches, he really preaches a more Jansenistic kind of guilt-ridden spirituality, that we're just never ever good enough, and there's no joy. I mean, at least the way I experience it is there's no smiling, there's no joy. It's very formal, very rigid, a lot of bowing and a lot of incense, but everybody's very glum.
Who's that
And-
bishop?
I'm sorry,
Who's that bishop?
who's our bishop? Robert Basha, who's a
Right.
very glum.
I'm glad I don't know him.
But I mean, it just seems to me to be, and maybe it's just my experience of it, but it goes back to a spirituality where God is not immanent. God is way beyond us, and we're nothing. And that's in some ways it's true, but I mean, we've also been redeemed. I don't know what else to say.
But the thing I've observed in my parish, which has a very substantial Latino population, is the only people who kneel down to receive communion are Hispanics. Now, is there something cultural
The only one.
that
Wow.
promotes that, Ned? I mean, I'm not, I mean,
Yeah.
because I mean, they are, and I've looked upon it, until you guys have given me I've looked upon it as a sign of extreme reverence.
Yes.
Extreme reverence.
Yeah,
It is.
reverence. I remember months ago, George Crick was saying that if he had his way with things, if he ever saw anybody kneel down to get communion, he would go up and grab them by the arm and tell them to stand up the way they were supposed to. But
For that-
I don't remember that, but it sounds like him.
it's not Crook.
But
But I. so
That's a
what
bit
is- what is it-
counterproductive, actually.
Yeah, very
might be.
counterproductive.
But what is it, Ned, or anybody about
There's a real cultural
Yeah.
issue, and it depends, and a lot depends on the level of education of the people. In Mexico, still, at the Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe, there are many, I guess I'd say thousands of people who approach the basilica on their knees.
their knees.
outside,
Yeah.
and they struggle all the way up the stairs into the
Yeah.
church, into the basilica, and all the way down the aisle, and bow and kiss the floor of the basilica at the altar, because
You can't suffer enough to please God. That's why.
Yeah,
You've got to
yeah.
suffer if you want
Well, I
to
think
please
that's
God.
that may be a little bit of judgment from an outsider as to what may be a valid cultural religious expression. Because those
Oh,
very same people may very well go home and participate in comunidades de base
Of course,
and
but
and the whole
I'm not-
liberation theology.
yeah,
But,
I'm not saying that, I don't know what it is, how you started, Tom, but, that, that posture, that behavior, isn't, just the fact, or expressing the fact that we're nothing, that, that, we're little pieces of garbage. No, that's a reverence to the transcendence, the love, particularly of Mary. Almost, it's a lot about Mary, and people need to be educated, in my opinion, into how Mary participates in the glory of God. She certainly is our mother, and she certainly is his mother, but she's not God. And a lot of us Mexicans behave as though Mary were the co-redemptrix that John
Let's
Paul
face
II.
it, Ned, for particularly for the let's say the native people, Mexican people, the Native American people, it was Mary who came, not God.
That's right. That's right. And you
So,
don't hear
you know,
that
you deal
often
with
about
the
Jesus
immediate
appearing to
presence.
people.
So she was representing God
Yes.
and maternally representing the love of God.
She's always doing that, but
Yeah.
the way the people interpret or the way the people behave is seeing Mary there, and the apparitions are accented with Mary, and you don't really think, I don't really think so much of Jesus appearing like he did to Faustina. I think of Mary going out and evangelizing herself, for her son. And she always points to her son, Juan Diego. I need a temple here so that you can go worship my son.
Mhm.
So and I used to be a sort of, I guess, rigid about that. I would say, geez, get away from Mary. But I don't care anymore. I think Mary leads us to Jesus in any which way we come to her. So
I don't particularly care how someone comes to communion as long as they come
yeah,
with a certain amount of stated reverence.
Yeah.
Good.
They want to
Right.
kneel down, fine. They want to stand up, fine. I mean, I think it's the reverse. We're taking it as a statement, and it may not be a statement
Mhm.
in the lives of many people.
You're right.
The second point I think is important for us to remember is transcendence, celebrating and observing the transcendence of God is not the province of the Latin Mass. The transcendence of God is celebrated in the Novus Ordo. It's done a little different, maybe. There's not as many smells of bells, but for example, in the centrality, in the two parts that we give to the Word of God, in the use of silence,
Yep.
it seems to me that there's a celebration of transcendence in the Novus Ordo that, Pope Paul VI, quoting someone, I forget who he was quoting, says, we don't say Mass, we pray Mass.
Mm.
Mhm.
And I think, for instance, there's a lot of the Roman canon made as a statement is that's true for a lot of people, but I don't think it's true for everybody. So I think we got to kind of gentle our way around this a little bit, if you will. I was involved a couple of weeks ago, and Tom, we talked about it, about that benediction thing, and I was really put off by it, both the way it was done and the whole, etc. It was
And I
a
would too.
show. Yeah, it was a show, and that kind of, I think, detracted from the mass. So we need organic kind of thinking about the liturgy, not I'm going to do my thing and you're going to do your thing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of a fair number, not all, of people who are for the Latin Mass are people, they're nostalgic people.
Yes.
You know, they like, cravats.
Yes.
And, there's a certain amount of that in it as well. It's what Pope Francis, I think, calls indiatrism, going backward.
Mhm.
And so, in some ways, I think we need to learn to relax with each other a little bit.
Yeah.
If I could go back,
Kind of poke fun at each other a little bit about these things.
yes, can I
Amen.
go back with you, Frank, just a minute? You said pray and
We don't say the Mass, pray the Mass.
pray the Mass, and we used to talk a lot about celebrate. And
Right.
the thought that goes through my mind is if it's just the priest presiding and celebrating, it's one thing. If it's a whole community
Right.
celebrating, that's to me the best that I can imagine.
But at the heart, celebrating is actually a good term for the global thing that happens. But at the heart of the Eucharist, it's a prayer. It is the prayer,
Yeah.
actually. And so I think that the incrustations, some of them are important, some of them aren't. You pay no attention to them, that kind of thing. So if someone, with a pious and believing heart comes to me for communion, puts out their tongue,
Oh, sure.
I don't care. That's,
Mhm.
I say Mass, I celebrate Mass at every so often down in Marin County. There's a community of people. A lot of them have been formed through Cursillo, but they formed themselves over the years, and they meet at a St. Vincent School for Boys that used to be an orphanage. And they have a chapel there. It's a church, really, and it's an old-fashioned. It's got stained glass windows, and it's but there's about 200 or 300 of them. But when you celebrate there, that community is alive, and those people, I mean, they respond and they sing, and they sing their old. They actually sing some service music that needs to be updated because it's got the old. But they know it and they sing it and they respond. And when you're preaching, they are with you. You just see it.
Gary,
And
I think you've touched on the overlay that celebration is a prayer.
Yes, it's energizing to me. I mean, it's inspirational.
So
Remember,
much.
prayer is always a dialogue.
Yeah.
Now, when you say prayer, it's not that I am praying, it's
Mhm.
that God and
Right.
me are communicating, but God never communicates just with me. He communicates with us and draws us together in Christ. Now, it's really the prayer of Christ, not
Right.
our prayer.
And so
Christ
much.
joining us
Go ahead.
to himself
Right.
that constitutes the heart of the prayer.
I really think
saying
that
Mass has the overtone of, following the rubrics and that kind of
Mhm.
thing.
That's for
Yeah.
sure.
I wish we could
a lot. It depends on the priest, on the celebrant. If the celebrant can communicate this worship together, this prayer that's a dialogue that Tom is talking about, and sometimes it's not the priest, sometimes it's the music, everything put together, and the priest sort of is part of it. But oftentimes the priest either puts a damper on it or can raise the consciousness and the spirit of the people into a wonderful communion.
When this conversation started, I think Gary, you and Frank, you talked about a statement. What was the reference to a statement? What was that about? I missed it.
I just simply said that my problem, I went to this ordination of a deacon at our cathedral with the bishop, and they did it's St. Eugene's, the cathedral has been redone. They've got altar rail now. Everything is as much, they do the mass as much as they can in Latin. They use the first Eucharistic prayer. But my experience has been, of course, knowing what they're like, that when I go there, I don't, for me, it's not mass, it's a statement. As I said last week, I told this young kid who's coming over tonight, I said, Chris, there was no full, active, conscious participation of the laity, but there was full, active, and conscious rejection of the Second Vatican Council. And it's probably my fault. I mean, that I just can't go there and feel that I'm praying. I go there because I have to, and I'm angry because I think of it as an in-your-face rejection of the Second Vatican Council. That's what it feels like to me. And that's probably coming from me. So,
Norm Supanchek, I hope you're connected with us.
I
And
am indeed.
I am curious
that's
exactly
what I meant, though.
what Gary Lombardi gave us. How would that overlay with your time in San Diego and that gathering?
Oh, that gathering is, I want to use the word progressive. You know, these old guys are looking at the church as being something that can continue to relate to people and be close to people, and the liturgy would be the same, that it should be something that people can relate to in their everyday lives. It's not something that you come to watch a show or how things were in the past or whatever.
Which I think all of us would celebrate, but Gary, Norm said, not many young priests joined that group in San Diego.
No.
And
No,
you put a
No.
spotlight on that in your diocese, I think.
Well,
Well,
the other thing in terms of the statement, I think, is that one of the things you see is the bleed of the Latin Mass rubrics into the Novus Ordo.
Yeah.
So, for example, in the Latin Mass, especially the Mass with back to the people, the Eucharist is elevated and for practical purposes, so people can see it. Whereas in the Novus Ordo, the word elevation doesn't appear. It says, show it to the people. And then you have, you know, the little things, the little rubric-y things that are done. But there's a certain sense, like, for instance, there was a priest in my home parish who every Sunday would say the Roman canon, number 1.
Yeah.
And there was a certain statement on his part that this was the real thing. That's kind of what I mean more, Bob.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, I'm saying that we shouldn't have the reaction from the other side saying, well, I'm not going to ever use it. And so I think that a number of things that get done are, if they're not done just because someone wants to say, well, Gary Lombardi, here, look at this, I'm in your face. They're done because they have the wider thing that Gary suggests, that the whole direction of the church liturgically is one that I'm not comfortable with, and I want to slow down, and this is the way I'm going to do it. And that, it seems to me, it may be a little harsh, but it seems to me that detracts from the spirit of your soul when you approach the liturgy.
Well, see, I like to think of it as being what Jesus did, that he gathered with his disciples, with his apostles. He broke bread with them and shared it with them and shared the cup with them. It was a feast of bonding, of unity, of closeness. It wasn't directed to someplace else. It was something they were celebrating together, their relationship
Yeah,
to each other and their bonding. And that's what the Mass should be too. It should be celebrating our bonding together as the family of God. And that we're there with the presence of God, celebrating that God is part of our life, a part of our relationship. To me, that's what it is. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's not something that we're God's way up there. We're trying to do something down here to please him up there. So it's him with us, gathered with us, and celebrating our relationship.
And the bonding and that relationship has a particular focus that I think is brought out in John's gospel. Because John's gospel account of the Last Supper replaces the institution narrative with the washing of the feet.
Yes.
And then the farewell discourse unfolds all of the implications of that relationship of service embodied in the washing of the feet. So we are united, not with Jesus, but we are united with the servant Jesus. We are united with the sacrifice of Jesus. Sacrifice embodied, yes, in the cross, but more deeply embodied in the act of service. Which
Amen. I like that,
as
Tom.
an act of service, as the fullness of service. He loved us and served us so much that he bore the consequences of that love in bearing the rejection of those for whom that love was threatening.
Okay, so I'm looking at my screen and there are 5 retired priests that I'm looking
Retarded priest, retarded.
at. Okay, whatever. Old men.
Old, yeah.
I hear you talking consistently, and every week it's the same thing about these young priests who seem to have gone in a different direction. Is there not any role that you guys can play with these young priests to kind of give them some insights from your experiences, some insights from your prayer life? Or is it just, they're going to do their thing and I don't have much to say about it? I mean, I'm just curious, and I'm not trying to be challenging, but it seems to me that you guys got a wealth of insights, a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of experience. Is there no way that, like Gary, you're having dinner with this young guy? I mean, do you guys feel that it's inappropriate for you to reach out, or that there's no formula or no format for that? I'm just curious. I mean,
I can only speak about my experience in our diocese.
Okay, I'd love to hear it.
There's no avenue for that. And
Really?
there's no interest in it. I mean, this young kid comes to me because I was the pastor. He basically got his vocation while I was at St. Vincent's, and he's always come and we chit chat, and he knows exactly how I think, and he knows exactly what he likes, and he absorbs it as he wants it. He's brought 2 other of the young clergy over. We've had great conversations, but that's been it. But there's no, the retired priests are gone in our diocese. We don't participate in anything. I've not gone to a retreat for a while now because I've been gone usually. And I don't go to the clergy gatherings because they're just basically business things now. There's no more ongoing education going on in our diocese.
Tim,
Hey,
I'm
Gary, I
really,
remember I remember when Sandra and I went to Mass in Fort Bragg, there was a young priest
Yeah, Andrew Pacheco,
yeah, and he said how important you were in his life and all that. And he really was borderline traditional. I mean, half of the time
borderline.
well, okay, yeah. I mean, there was some English in the Mass, but and so they don't want to hear from you. Is that kind of what I'm hearing you say? They just don't have an interest in your point of view?
You know what? I have a telephone, and they can call me. But there's no avenue. Andrew was here. He had dinner a few times for the couple of priests living at the rectory, but he never invited me. You know, and I've been here. He knows he never invited me. So
Okay.
no, there's no interest on their part. I've not seen any.
Huh.
Well, it's on our diocese, we get invited to convocations and all of that. There's a certain thing on, you know, with all in life, for example, you can't wait for someone to tell you to do something.
Mhm.
So I think there's a certain sense where we need to be sensitive to opportunities where we can reach out to not to correct them, not to make them like we are, but just to kind of befriend them and have them in our orbit or have us in their orbit. I had the good fortune when I came back of being in the seminary with I was the oldest guy there. And so I have one in particular that he's very traditionalist. And he's the one that this Eucharistic thing I was so upset about. And he's in England paying homage to the king, because that's another issue, given I'm a Gaylophile. But when he comes back, I'll you know, he calls me and we talk a lot, and we'll get into it. I'm very grateful for kind of some of the observations that Tom had on the liturgical ins and outs of this, and I'll integrate that and have a conversation with him. What else can I do? I can't force him, so it's that kind of thing. There's a young priest who's just been ordained, and he went to South Boston. His family was Opus Dei. He's enormously talented. The five of them that were ordained came here to say mass, and he preached, and it was superb. And he called me last week and said, he's got a conflict. Could I cover for him on Saturday? I said, of course I can, Peter. And he said, Frank, I owe you one. I said, no, you don't. You don't owe me anything. So there's a building relationship going on there. I'm not in the world to convert him, but I am in the world to show him that those of us, and you, other priests, much longer than I have been, in active ministry, that we care about the same thing, the advancement of the kingdom of God.
And modeling behavior.
Well, I'm not trying to convert him to behave like me, because I'm not all that sure that I'm a model of behavior for anyone. And so then I have another one who was ordained in May of 2019 and left in December.
Wow.
And he's off in Texas teaching, and he's immature. He never grew up. The seminary failed completely, and he's still there's still something there. He even verbalized it for the first time in a conversation the other day about coming back. So I think that this kind of, looking for opportunities to outreach. I never asked him, Corey, are you coming back? Will you come back? Do you ever think about coming back? I say, how are you? How is your life going? What do you think?
Oh, yeah.
And it comes out naturally. He tells me where he is, what his life is, et cetera, et cetera. And so hopefully, he may in time grow into a realization of I can't even say the mistake that he's made, but a realization that maybe the decision he made is not the best one for his life. So I think it's that type thing, Tim, rather than going out and saying, aha, I'm going to snare that one and get him to kind of do what I want him to do. Mm-hmm. That is a role that I have a young man who called me because of my background, who was from another state, far away in the country.
That makes you an expert.
He had just left the ministry, and he was going through the kind of turmoil that I know that you go through when you leave the ministry. And we're still friends. We talk, I've never met him. We talk on the phone with some regularity. He's settled down now. He's married, has two beautiful little girls. But I know this guy is a priest. But I never say, Alvaro, when are you coming back? So I think this opportunity, I'm sure, I'm sure it's part of this is what Gary does. Every time we talk, Gary's having dinner with some other young deacon or young
The
priest.
same one. It's always the same one.
What's happening in those meetings?
Yeah. You know, there's one other thing.
Tim, I don't know if that responds to your question.
No,
or not.
no.
Jim-
I understand I do understand you. Yeah.
There's one other thing I want to say, and then I'm gonna need to hear from Norman, Tom, and Bob. But years ago, when Cordileone was the Bishop of Oakland, there was a story, and actually a priest told Levada this. And it was I was down at the San Francisco Cathedral, and I forget why we were all there, but at that time Levada was there too, and this priest friend of mine, Tom Madden. And Cordileone had just come to San Francisco. And Tom Madden was saying to Cordileone, that in Oakland, when Cordileone, he gathered the young priests, because he does hold on to them, and told them that the problems in the Catholic Church now are due to the Vatican II priests. So you need to be wary of them. That's what Cordileone told these young guys. And I know that's the same sense. The guy at the cathedral, Frank Epperson, is the director of seminarians, and he has that same attitude. I've heard that before. So if they don't approach us, it's because they think we're going to corrupt them. I guess, I don't know.
Well, maybe so. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember Cardinal McIntyre told us the exact same thing way back in 1967. A little group of us, that Vatican II was the problem, and it was just beginning back then. What do you guys think the image of who God is plays a role in the extreme traditionalist or the Vatican II folks? It's a combination of a bunch of stuff, but it seems to me that we get our a great part of our personalities from our parents, our dads, our moms, how they treated us, what we thought was loving and what we thought was disciplinary and all that kind of stuff. And it seems to me that the atmosphere, the culture of the world right now being so secular and so demanding that we leave them alone, let them do whatever they want. I am me. I'm a self-contained unit. I don't need anybody else, including God. Does that also contribute to the attitude or the heart that's trying to respond to God? And so who God is he a loving father, or is he a this powerful majesty?
Speaking for myself, my brothers and sister and I say my mother was the son of Irish immigrants. And we say the gift, mom's gift that keeps on giving is guilt. It is, I think I was raised, and my next oldest brother would say the same thing, is God was a judgmental, I went to St. Athanasius in Long Beach, and we had these young nuns, and it was never God is love, God is mercy. It was,
you know, you better be careful, you go to hell. I mean, it was not, as you're trying to say, Ned. I mean, and I think I carried that kind of attitude well into my adult life. You know, is it, it's just it's a judgmental God, and I think that the church, in a way, fostered that. At least the church that I knew when I was, you know, I mean, I think the seminary fostered that. Maybe I'm wrong.
McIntyre sure did.
I think my high school education in what God is or what the church is was one of a vindictive, judgmental asshole, you know. And that was represented by the kinds of priests that we had. They were tough.
Is that what translates into traditional Catholicism and worship? And
I don't know.
Yeah, I think we need to be careful with each other. I understand the whole judgmental thing, but God did send his son to make right what was screwed up in the world.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you read St. Paul's gospel for St. Paul's reading for tomorrow from Romans. And so, and on the other hand, of course, God is loving and merciful. And the secularist, I think, you know, secularism is the sign of the times. And the whole thing about that Pope John the 23rd said is the church needs to read the sign of the times, not denounce it, read it. And the older I get, I think that when all the fluff falls away, that the insight of what Jesus of Nazareth did for the world has the potential to give meaning to people in whatever situation they're in. But that unfortunately, we're in a time in history where we don't know how to bring the match about. And so the church doesn't know how to speak to the secularists or the young people who say, I'm spiritual but not religious. And frankly, some of them are, some of them aren't, but some of them are. Or that that we have trouble kind of engaging. I mean, I would think that a Roman Catholic and an atheist sitting down over a couple of beers could have the most wonderful discussion.
Ned, that's Ed Howard.
Much more than a Roman Catholic and an agnostic. That'd be dull as hell. And so I'm kind of searching, I think, because I really do think in my bones that the gospel of Christ and what Christ did for the world has the potential to give meaning to all of these searching people, but we don't know how to preach it to them.
Interesting.
I think
And so we shouldn't write. The last thing we should do is set up the secularist mentality as an enemy. Now, consumerism, materialism, those kinds of things, they've always been enemies of the church. But secularism, it's the field of mission. Sorry.
Sadly, consumerism and materialism have been enemies also within the church,
Mhm.
which is a sad thing too, that we tend to respond to consumerism and materialism outside without realizing how much church life is burning incense at the shrine of materialism and
Right.
consumerism.
That's right.
And I think that you know, we set up a straw god or a straw man, straw god maybe, in opposing secularism, when maybe we need to start searching for where is the grace in the secular.
Mhm.
Bob was going to say something.
Yeah, my sense is that I'll just say my own generation and the older priests that are still in active duty and the younger priests. I tend to feel, and I don't have that much exposure, I'd have to say that, of loads and loads of exposure, but the way that Mass is said is just kind of rote. They just read. They're just reading. They're not proclaiming. They're not praying. They're just reading what's on the piece of paper and working their way through it. And maybe the dynamic changes a little bit when you get to the consecration element, and then you just keep reading more. Now this might be my bias because this is my own disposition. I think that the newer liturgies we have, we have the 4 that were there for a long time, and then they added 4 more, and we have some additional special ones for reconciliation. And there's a group from the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests that have worked up a liturgical prayer, for peace. That's really well done. And I think, whatever it is, I think very often the Mass is just a rote, routine, not only not dramatic, but there's not a feeling. There's not a sense of purpose. It's not a raising of prayer to God and saying something that is happening. It's just rote. Read it through, then give communion and that kind of thing. I do find, I was a couple of weeks ago now, I was up in the Seattle area, and it was the only parish, I think, in the community there, and everybody participated in the Mass. I didn't meet the priest that was there, but they've done a lot of good things, and they have a young priest actually there who's just 5 years in. He's been a pastor there for 2 years, and he's really bringing life to it, even though he wishes everything was done in Latin. He loves to do it in Latin, So I think that a part, the younger priests and the older priests, I mean, it's like it's over. And they're just doing it rote. So there was a young guy that became a pastor. I think he's about 5 years in, and he was at the parish down in Nashville where my brother goes, which it's been a very dynamic parish there. And he was very good, but he said the Mass until he got to the consecration, and it was just reading it through. And he was a very good homilist, had very interesting things that engaged the people to say. But I think, it's an exceptional parish. I'm saying this without being at very many parishes, having the experience of it. But I think the fact of the matter is people are dropping out because there's no energy in many of the way that parishes are running. There's not energy. There's just routine and rote that I think many experience when they go to the church. Whether it's the priest saying or the singing, fewer and fewer people. I mean, we're down into something like 20% of the Catholics. There was just a thing that the Paulist priest, Diziano, just did. I mean, our numbers are way down. The numbers of priests, the number of Catholics that are coming to church, and on and on. And I think we do need something that's going to put energy back into it. And I think we need to when we have the opportunity to pray with other people, I think to really trying to get them engaged, because we're expressing our faith, not just reading our faith and doing the ritual. And I'm not sure what's going to come out of it in the past, but I think we're in trouble. That's my
I think so too. And I'm reflecting back. I think some of you know, before I retired, I spent 6 years as director of adult faith formation at a parish here in Irvine. And my question is, what's going on from Monday through Saturday within the parish that leads toward the celebration of community?
Well, we
I
haven't.
don't perceive the life of parishes. And again, like Bob said, I've got experience in maybe 3, maybe 4 parishes, but I don't see the parts of the ministries in parishes coming together all to prepare us for the Sunday celebration. They're all independent. Sometimes there's all kinds of feuding going on. It's a scattering of separate units.
And so what let me share with you some interesting things, because I've shared with you guys my current pastor, who was very much of a traditionalist and all that. And so he announced that he is being transferred to the Chancery office because he has a lawyer background. He's going to work, I guess, on legal issues affecting the diocese. And the guy who's taking over, and this is kind of an exciting thing, the guy who's taking over the parish, he was born in Florida. His name is Andreas Gutierrez. He got his master's degree at the University of Florida in engineering and was engaged in all of that and made the decision that he had this calling. And for some reason, he went to Spain to seminary and then to Rome. He spent, I guess, 3 or 4 years in Spain, and then he spent 3 or 4 years in Rome. And when he finished in Rome, instead of coming back to Florida, he went to Cusco, Peru as a missionary. And it was his ministry to go into the high Andes to these small villages working for and with the poor. And he's done that now for 15 years. And so he's probably in his, no, he was ordained in 2015. So he's been doing it now for 8 years in Peru. And his parents live near me here in North Carolina. And I don't know what all went on, but and I think part of it is that Catholic priests and religious are being persecuted by terrorists in Peru. I think it's kind of a fragile situation. And so he has requested to come to the Diocese of Charlotte, which he's never been associated with an American diocese. And he's going to be our new pastor, and he's going to start on the 9th. And he's also, from what our late deacon did, he's going to bring along a couple of deacons who have been working with him in Peru. And Andres is extremely fluent. I mean, he was born in Florida. He went to U of F. His parents live here. And that they're going to make Western North Carolina kind of a mission territory and reach out predominantly to the poor and to the underprivileged. And so it's the most exciting thing that I can imagine happening to this parish that has become sterile as all get out with this. We had Capuchins for 25 years. So now the diocese brought in a couple of new guys, and they are very traditionalist, and the parish's life vitality net just died. And so we're really hopeful, just really, really hopeful that having someone who has a missionary evangelical kind of point of view might really bring some vitality to the parish. Another thing happening. So this priest, this pastor that we have, he was made pastor after only 2 years of ordination, but he was 53, 54, and he had been a lawyer for his whole life. And so the bishop thought, well, because he's been a lawyer, he can handle a parish. Well, he's had 3 parochial vicars, every one of which were new, and every one of which has left the priesthood.
Oh my.
So we're 3 for 3. And the young guy that we have now just announced that he has asked the bishop for a 1-year leave of absence, that he needs a period of discernment. And Sandra and I were talking to him after a funeral on Friday, and what he's going to do is he's going to go to work in the county jail. He's going to be a sheriff's deputy working in the county jail, you know. And when we were talking with this kid, he's 40, you know, so he was a late ordinary. He was so immature. You know, it was like, well, I really don't know what I want to do. And Frank, it kind of reminds me of the guy that you're talking to, you know, I don't know what I want to do. And he used a term which shocked me, that he said, you know, parish priests are like independent contractors. We're independent contractors. No one tells us what to do. He says, now the pastor will say, I want you to cover funerals or do anointing. But he said, I pretty much can do what I want without any kind of leadership, any kind of mentoring. Well, shit, no wonder these young guys leave. You can't run an army on not having mentors. You can't run an organization without having mentoring. And it's just really sad, but I wanted to share with you that this optimism.
Tim, if I can interrupt there, I think, yes, it is true, but when you get immature men who have to be told what to do and how to form their own ministry, you don't form a ministry by waiting for someone to tell you to do. You put your imprint on the ministry by the way you go out and encounter the people.
Yeah.
So, you know, in defense of some pastors, I think that it's a bad mix if you've got someone, the priest, the pastor who's not going to do anything, just let him do whatever he wants, and you get a young person like my friend. His main thing was he didn't like what they told him to do, and I said, fine, go make your own ministry. And he couldn't do that. He was too immature. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think
you're not. No, you're adding
take one step back. They're not being formed in the seminary as to how to engage in ministry within the Vatican II Church. Notice I'm carefully avoiding some loaded prepositions here. It's not ministering to the Vatican II Church, it's ministering within the ecclesial community, which is the body of Christ as envisioned by the Vatican II Church. They can go through the entirety of their seminary formation and not even have encountered that concept.
And I'm glad you brought that up, Tom, because I've been sitting here thinking the how would we call it? Inspection of the seminary system, evaluation. Is there any mentoring going on? I haven't heard much about what really goes on in the seminaries these days.
Well, I need to, without mentioning names, I need to say one thing. When I left Good Shepherd Parish, there was a priest appointed as the pastor, and he was assigned a mentor as pastor. And, you know, I would have been very happy to mentor him, but that was not the powers that be. But the mentor was, in my humble estimation, and I won't reveal anything further, one of the biggest assholes that I know.
And so if you're an asshole, do you mentor assholes? Is that how it
Well,
works?
I would draw that, I would be inclined to draw that conclusion. I would not
Would be-
be
Yes,
so charitable. I would not be so uncharitable as to fully draw that conclusion, but I'd be inclined to.
is Pope Francis initiating any serious review of the seminary system? I haven't heard about that.
I haven't heard either.
No,
Well, here in the US, I'd say 2 years ago at least, they went through a whole process of updating the guidance that comes out of the Vatican. It has to be done by each country for itself. So ours was sent over, and it came back, and our bishops just did something with it. I didn't pay much attention to it, but the commentary that I picked up with it, and I'm not able to articulate much beyond it, but they feel it's not doing for the seminaries what seminaries need to do. But they're doing this thing. And I think it's another dimension of our bishops as a group. They could care less, it seems, about whatever the Vatican is asking. They certainly aren't responding with enthusiastic support of Pope Francis. They're kind of doing their own thing. So I don't have much confidence in whatever is coming out of seminaries these days. And just to pick out one experience I had just last weekend in the parish that I was the pastor of, this was a guy that was somewhere in his upper 40s. His father ran a business that had to do with, I think, either the water in a home or the heater in a home, whatever it was. And I don't ever think I ever saw his father in church, but he went to our parish from childhood. And so all of a sudden, when I was there, and I was there already a couple of years, and I saw this guy, he's a fairly tall guy, I'd say 6 feet probably, kind of strong looking fellow, and he's standing by himself in the middle of in one of the pews in the parish. And he just grew into interest, never finished college. I'm not sure he's had even 2 years of college. So we got him, he became a lector, and he started to do things, and, put him on the parish council. He got very interested and very active. And I had some interaction with him. And there was another priest who's very interesting, older guy. And we talked him into going to the university and finishing his college and to look seriously toward being a priest. And so last Saturday, he became a priest of the diocese. And so he had his first mass last Sunday. So he's probably now in his 50s, and he just was ordained, and he's been assigned. And I think he's going to be a good priest. He's a good priest because he relates well. He related well to the people in the parish, and so he's come along with that. And he gave a wonderful homily. Gave a really good homily. But one of my critiques that at some point I want to talk with him, because the reading of the Mass was kind of rote, and there wasn't a passion. There wasn't an enthusiasm in a certain sense. Now, of course, it was his first Mass that he was saying by himself, so he has to kind of grow into that. But I'm not sure how I got to where it is, but what we were talking about. But I think that the formation and the enthusiasm of our bishops for what's happening in the church at large, which Pope Francis is trying to promote, I think our bishops are not doing. And I think a lot of them are simply letting us kind of go back, is my concern. We have a young bishop here, He's been with us now for a little over 2 years. I came out of Pittsburgh. He's 59, might be 60 now. Very dynamic, very articulate, writes regularly for the Priest magazine, has been doing that for years. And he's very organized, but he's also moving everybody all over the place and reassigning here and reassigning there. And I'm not sure how the priests are responding, but we're trying to get together. So I think we're in trouble. I'm not sure where that ties into what you were saying, but it's what I'm seeing in my diocese and that I'm concerned about.
Could I move this conversation to a completely different but very important topic?
Amen.
All ears.
Ned had, when we started our conversation, Ned sent out the text of his eulogy for George.
I didn't see it.
It just came. If you were paying attention to the conversation, you wouldn't have seen it. But it's there. But I just want to ask Ned, how is Betty? How is his family? How are they doing? Have you been in touch?
Betty, John, and Susan, right?
Betty, John, and Susan, yeah.
Yes. I'm very surprised that I haven't heard from John, because he and I agreed that we were going to talk together and relate and do things together. And I've reached out a couple times and I haven't heard a response yet. Betty is with family. She's visiting and being visited. She says she's fine. I think she's trying. My take is that she's trying to do something instead of go through something. Assimilate, understand, and move on. Susan is still bereft. The mass was on the 31st of last month, and so it's but three weeks ago, and she's having a lot of trouble. She's got a really great man for her husband, and he's been very supportive. I never knew him well, and I'm beginning to know him, and he's just a good man. And so she's leaning on him a lot. But Betty is sort of, I haven't had a serious conversation with her. She seems to be trying to do things, and there's grief that people go through, and there's a process, and I don't see her doing that. I'm going to be talking with her Tuesday, and I'll let you know otherwise. Sorry I didn't send that eulogy earlier. I thought I had, but I.
Yeah, a question. When you say Betty is spending time with family, by that do you mean her family?
Yes.
As distinct from John and Susan? John and Susan are not her children, right?
They are not.
Yeah. She's a stepmother.
Yes, but she and Betty and Susan during the last 6 to 8 months have become very close, very supportive of one another. And the fact that Susan is still, Susan is admirable, just admirable. she's got a daughter with autism, who through the ministry, both legal and spiritual, of George, has been brought to a level of living that would not have been expected of her with the spectrum, where she was in the spectrum of autism.
Mhm.
And Susan has been just, I like the word stalwart. I don't know if you hear me saying it a lot, but she is just a stalwart with Mia. But she's also still very tender, very very sensitive, and thank God for her husband. And Betty and I haven't had a serious conversation, so I don't think that Betty is. I haven't heard that Betty and Susan are sharing much together. I would hope that they would, because they're both sensitive, strong, intelligent, supportive people, and they could help each other a lot. I don't know what else to tell you.
You said that she said when you asked her, "I'm fine." After my wife died, if people asked me how I was, and at that particular time I didn't want to talk about it, I'd say I'm fine.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting.
So everybody works to a different clock on this.
Yeah.
Frank,
And
is there another
A lot
question?
depends on how you ask questions, how
Yeah.
you present yourself. But go ahead. Sorry.
From your experience, is there another question that might be more helpful if you are wanting to show concern for a person in who's grieving,
me,
other than how are you?
Are you asking me, Tom, or
I'm
Frank?
asking Frank.
Yeah.
I kind of think it depends on the person.
Mhm.
Can I take you to dinner? Watch a lunch?
Mhm.
And then it's her field. In other words, if she wants to get into it, she can get into it. And obviously, if she comes with you, you're obviously going to talk about George. And that in itself has a therapeutic thing
Yeah.
for her. And if
Ned,
she
have
says,
you had any real visit with her
No,
in person since then? Like
no,
inviting her for lunch or something?
no.
it could be that she's not ready, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the responses that I get are so even tempered, so balanced, so
Mhm.
I don't want to say antiseptic, because she's not that kind of a person, but she's just fine. And smiles, and we talk, and not
Fine is one of the most anodyne words in the English language.
I'm sorry?
It's one of the most anesthetic words in the English language.
Fine. Yeah. Yeah, it
So,
doesn't
but you
say- it
can't
doesn't
push
say
it.
anything, huh?
You can't push it.
That's right.
It's her timetable, but at some point it would seem to me within a month or 6 weeks, you say, "Gee, could we have lunch?"
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Francis,
I love having lunch with people. Gary, what?
Pope Francis, he always talks about accompaniment, and I think that's about all you can do.
Yes, that's my watchword, and it was emphasized to me by Tom throughout this whole thing, really.
Right.
And that is the way I think to
Right.
relate.
Right.
Accompany, support, don't push, but respond. So. I think it's time now, though, to invite and as you're suggesting, having lunch. I love to have lunch with friends.
Yeah.
So
Because that's a much
And
more
I think-
natural entree That's a much more natural entree than kind of saying, how you doing with it, Betty? Kind of, you know what I
How you
mean?
holding up?
Yeah.
Ned, I
Check,
just
check,
finished
check,
reading.
check.
I just finished reading your eulogy that you sent out. I
Yeah.
don't know how you got through that without breaking down. You must have practiced it over and over.
I did. I did. I read it to Darlene several times and I couldn't get through it. And I told myself I was not going to, because when I break down, I don't know, Tom, if
You're
you-
hopeless. You're hopeless. We
I
know
am
you're hopeless.
hopeless. Really, I don't
Really
know
do
if
it.
Tom and Gary noticed it, but there was a time when we were waiting for the machine to come and dump dirt into the expanse there that they had just lowered the casket into. And the first homilist or eulogist, Alberto Alvarado, came over to me and I looked at him and simultaneously we melted and I don't know, 25, 30 minutes and we were just sobbing and didn't want that to happen. Did you guys notice that? I hope not.
I only noticed when you came to Tom and Tom comforted you because you started crying when
Yeah, well,
before the service started though.
Tom
I didn't see that at the end though.
Tom is a very special dude.
And so you were talking. in your-
Meanwhile, Gary and Ted were having an interesting
I
conversation.
was trying to stop it because the family was right there, but Ted was going.
And
I'm not sure that Frank and Bob know about Teddy Howard, but talk about a character. So just, I want to make, you're talking about the first time that we were in the dining hall, or not the first time, but George's eating habits, putting a lot of pepper on his food. You mentioned that.
Yeah.
I remember, I think it was summer of junior year, between junior and senior year. I had started surfing with Gatlin and Crowell and stuff like that. And so after school was over in the springtime, we were going to go camping up at Juan Cabrillo State Park. Is that up near Ventura or Santa Barbara or something?
Yeah, yeah.
And George came along. And so there were a couple of divey kind of greasy spoon places we were going to go to for breakfast. And so Gatlin and Crowell and I don't know who else was there, maybe Teddy. We were ordering breakfast. And so the waitress asked George, well, how do you like your eggs? And he said, well, what do you mean? How do I like my eggs? And she said, do you want them scrambled, fried, sunny side up? And he said, well, how does my mom make them? And I think that the only way he had ever had eggs from his mom was maybe, let's say, scrambled. And so it was kind of like taking someone to Paris that had never been off the farm, is that he now understood there was different ways to have eggs. That story is in my mind forever, because needless to say, he got holy shit from us that he did not know about different ways of eating eggs.
At age 17 or 18, right?
Exactly. And that's the thing that has been for me, friends say, well, why are you so emotional about this friend of yours that you've known since you were 14 or 15 that you haven't seen but 2 or 3 times in 50? Why are you so emotional about it? It's because I think being reconnected with you guys from seminary it opens up this file cabinet in my mind about all of the crazy things that we did in high school. And the more I think about it, the more things I remember. Like just reading your eulogy, Ned, reminded me of George and eggs, which is how the mind works is always a mystery to me.
And the word that comes to me, Tim, is family. We became family.
A lot of ways, yes, a lot of ways.
Yeah. And And so this has been a wonderful, the last couple of months with George's dying, or with his dying and then his death. And it's really been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful thing to go through. I mean, I'm sorry he's gone, but it's been a very consoling, for me, a very consoling thing to see how his faith, the strength of his faith, just kind of has inspired me. It's just been wonderful. So I thank George for that. I really do.
You know, one of the reasons I think that we sort of gravitated toward one another is he was from Bell. A lot of Okies in Bell.
Yeah.
I was from East Los Angeles, just a few miles.
A lot of
north.
Chicanos there.
Yeah. And I remember, I think I mentioned to you guys, I went to a dinner at the Kroll's house
in Lakewood.
Yeah, with Theus.
It was kind of upscale. It was more upscale than what we lived in.
Yeah, well, this was a soiree. I mean, it was really something. And I walked in and I looked at the table and I was blown away. I sat down and I'm looking at 3 plates stacked on top of each other, and I don't know, 20 pieces of silverware and 3, containers, cup, a glass, and all this shit. And I must have looked crazy because Tricia sat next to me, and she said, "Just do what I do."
Bless her heart.
Yeah, just do what I do. I'll pick this up and you pick it up and you'll see what I do with it, and then you do it and it'll come easy and it'll be fine. I'll never forget that. And George and I, when we talked about the primitive culture coming into the seminary. I mean, there were guys that were Malloy was his parents were at least his dad was a lawyer.
So his mom was too.
I was just going to say, I think both of them were, and so there were all these upper middle class families.
You got the Lombardis and the J Bros and the Dotsons, and here we were from working class families. Yeah,
right.
Gary,
right.
You don't know how much we envied you.
Right? Well, because my dad drove a Cadillac.
Yeah.
Yes.
He drove a Cadillac because he wanted as much steel around him as possible.
Good line. Good line.
Oh, Lord. So anyway, those kinds of communalities, drew us together. But George, my God, he had been reading since he was 6 or 7 or something, and he got into heavy duty stuff, politics particularly.
Franklin, FDR,
the Depression and FDR, and all that stuff. And I had a tutor there.
It didn't end. Tell Tim the story you told us last week when you first sat at the table with George and what he said. I forget what you said, but it was very, very good. And then I'm going to have to bug out of here in a few minutes.
It's in the eulogy. You mean lots of pepper?
Whatever I do other things that are whatever.
Oh yeah, he looked at me and I'm staring at him. I should maybe not have been staring, but I looked at him because he was kept going like this, And then he stopped and he looks up and he sees me looking at him, and he said something like, "I do other great and wonderful things too, And then he,
So let me ask you. And so, did they call it?
How were those eggs cooked?
I'm sorry. Yeah, it was.
How were those eggs cooked?
I think in seminary they're all scrambled, weren't they?
Yep.
Yeah.
I thought
so,
they were
yeah.
powdered eggs myself for a while.
I think they were powdered eggs. And so let me remind myself. So in the dining hall, did we sit alphabetically or did we sit wherever we wanted?
I was alphabetically sent.
We were alphabetical.
With our class too.
Yeah.
Everywhere. Jeez.
That's why I never sat with Welbers, because Welbers was,
That's right. That
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
right off in the end.
yeah, and you're always on
The
the other
Stupenchuk
end of the
and
classroom.
Ziegler and
I
Wall.
just remember, there's one guy I remember. I don't have the same kind of memory that you guys do, but in our first year, was a guy named John Nicholas Leary.
Oh, yes.
He had
Ah,
his
ah,
mother. I swear to God, and he must have been. Where do all the Okies come from? Bell. I
Bell,
don't-
yeah.
but
Maywood Bell.
John Nicholas Leary had I'm sure his mother just put a bowl around his head and just shaved it because it was just around like that. But we sat down for dinner. His arms reached out and he just ate it was like, I said, I better take something, otherwise I'm not going to get anything to eat. He had an amazing appetite. And he just, with these big, long hands just came in and just scooped everything. I mean, he hadn't eaten for a lifetime, but
We were really a tossed salad in the freshman year.
we were
Oh,
all,
yeah. Oh, yeah. I
there were
remember,
96 of us.
is that
Yeah.
what it was?
Yeah, it
96?
was close
thought
to
it was
100.
100.
I think
Was
it
it 96?
started at 104.
Well,
I think there were some real quick dropouts.
Yeah.
I remember a guy that was in my dorm who didn't last very long, and he did not want to shower with us.
oh, well.
And so I think he went weeks without showering, or he only waited till weekends when he went home to shower. And I'm thinking about it now, how unprepared we all were for communal living. Here we are, we're ninth graders, and we're thrown into these dorms of 20 people, and you've got to, we're sharing sinks, we're sharing, and the thing I remember about George Quick is he had to shave as a freshman. He had so much, he had to shave. I was so jealous of that,
Had a shadow by 5 o'clock or so, 4 o'clock.
Oh yeah.
How soon? I think it was maybe at the first quarter that we reduced from A, B, and C to just A and B.
Do you think it was that quick? You think it was that quick?
I do. Gary,
Yeah.
maybe you
I don't,
or Tom? Or at the semester,
I don't remember any of that.
We
there
would
was
know
no
down
more
very
one
quickly.
C. It went from 3 classes down to 2.
By the
I think that
second
was
year,
at the
we were
semester.
2A and 2B.
Well, are we boring, Frank Daly?
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm
I'm
listening.
sorry.
No, I'm listening. It's very interesting because we went through similar experiences. I mean,
Yeah.
like that whole comment about being unprepared for communal living.
And so
Was,
Frank and Bob, how old were you when you entered seminary? Were you just ninth graders, as like we were?
No, I was 17, almost 18.
Oh,
And so would you go in as like a high school senior or a freshman in college?
After high school, I went into a 2-year, we called it then a minor seminary.
Okay.
And then I went 2 years in the major seminary, philosophy, now went to Rome for theology.
What about you, Bob?
Yeah, I went into Christian Brother place in the middle of my sophomore year of high school. And I only lasted half a year with them. And then I went to the seminary for high school down in Cincinnati. And
Okay.
2 years of college there, and then to Catholic U, and then to North American.
Okay. And so we're the only guys that went in as ninth graders then. That's interesting.
That was
Yeah.
one of the few places.
We
And
is there
called you-
anything-
minor
we called you
seminary.
lifers.
And now when you see ninth graders, you say, holy God.
yes, yes.
Oh,
yes.
oh my God. Yes.
I'm
My-
gonna need to bug out, so.
Hey, Gary.
Well, shall
God
we
bless
call
you.
it,
Take care,
I-
Gary.
call it a day anyway? Thank you, Lord, for the gathering and
Yes,
Go ahead,
12:03 now.
Mentor some more of those young priests, please.
amen.
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 God bless you all.
God bless. Thank
Have
you.
a beautiful weekend.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
you too. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.